2 weeks slipped by on the wings of time and opportunity and achievement, all colored so wonderfully for Lucy, all spelling that adventure for which she had yearned. Lucy was riding down into the sage toward the monuments with a whole day before her. Bostel kept more and more to himself, a circumstance that worried her, though she thought little about it. Van had taken up the training of the king, and Lucy had deliberately quarrelled with him so that she would be free to ride where she listed. Farland nagged her occasionally about her rides into the sage, insisting that she must not go so far and stay so long, and after Van's return to work he made her ride Sarchedon. Things had happened at the ford which would have concerned Lucy greatly had she not been over-excited about her own affairs. Someone had ambushed Bostel in the cottonwoods near his house, and had shot at him, narrowly missing him. Bostel had sworn he recognized the shot as having come from a rifle, and that he knew to whom it belonged. The riders did not believe this, and said some boy, shooting at a rabbit or coyote, had been afraid to confess he had nearly hit Bostel. The riders all said Bostel was not wholly himself of late. The river was still low, the boat had not been repaired, and Creech's horses were still on the other side. These things concerned Lucy, yet they only came and went swiftly through her mind. She was obsessed by things intimately concerning herself. "Oh, I oughtn't to go," she said aloud. But she did not even check Sarchedon's long swing, his rocking-chair lope. She had said 100 times that she ought not go again out to the monuments, for Lin Slone had fallen despairingly, terribly in love with her. It was not this, she averred, but the monuments and the beautiful Wildfire that had woven a spell round her she could not break. She had ridden Wildfire all through that strange region of monuments, and now they claimed something of her. Just as wonderful was Wildfire's love for her. The great stallion hated Slone and loved Lucy. Of all the remarkable circumstances she had seen or heard about a horse, this fact was most striking. She could do anything with him. All that savageness and wildness disappeared when she approached him. He came at her call. He whistled at the sight of her. He sent out a ringing blast of disapproval when she rode away. Every day he tried to bite or kick Slone, but he was meek under Lucy's touch. But this morning there came to Lucy the first vague doubt of herself. Once entering her mind, that doubt became clear. And then she vowed she liked Slone as she might a brother, and something within her accused her own conviction. The conviction was her real self, and the accusation was some other girl lately born in her. Lucy did not like this new person. She was afraid of her. She would not think of her unless she had to. I never cared for him that way," she said aloud. I couldn't ever. I love Lin Slone." The spoken thought. The sound of the words played havoc with Lucy's self-conscious calmness. She burned. She trembled. She was in a rage with herself. She spurred Sarchedon into a run and tore through the sage, down into the valley, running him harder than she should have run him. Then she checked him and, penitent, petted him out of all proportion to her thoughtlessness. The violent exercise only heated her blood, and if anything increased the sudden and new torment. Why had she discarded her boy's rider outfit and chaps for a riding habit made by her aunt, and one she had scorned to wear? Some awful accusing voice thundered in Lucy's burning ears that she had done this because she was ashamed to face Lin Slone any more in that costume, and she wanted to appear in his eyes, to look like a girl. If that shameful suspicion was a fact, why was it? What did it mean? She could not tell, yet she was afraid of the truth. All of a sudden Lin Slone stood out clear in her mental vision, the finest type of rider she had ever known. A strong, lithe, magnificent horseman, whose gentleness showed his love for horses, whose roughness showed his power. A strange, intense, lonely man in whom she had brought out pride, gratitude, kindness, passion, and despair. She felt her heart swell at the realization that she had changed him, made him kinder, made him divide his love as did her father, made him human, hopeful, longing for a future unfettered by the toils of desert allurement. She could not control her pride. She must like him very much. She confessed that, honestly, without a qualm. It was only bewildering moments of strange agitation and uncertainty that bothered her. She had refused to be concerned by them until they had finally impinged upon her peace of mind. Then they accused her. Now she accused herself. She ought not to go meet Lin Slone any more. "But then, the race," she murmured. "I couldn't give that up. And oh, I'm afraid the harm is done. What can I do?" After the race, what then? To be sure, all of Bostel's Ford would know she had been meeting Lin Slone. Slone out in the sage, training his horse. What would people say? "Dad will be simply radiant if he can buy Wildfire, and a fiend if he can't," she muttered. Lucy saw that her own impulsiveness had amounted to daring. She had gone too far. She excused that, for she had a rider's blood. She was Bostel's girl. But she had, in her wildness and joy and spirit, spent many hours alone with a rider to his undoing. She could not excuse that. She was ashamed. What would he say when she told him she could see him no more? The thought made her weak. He would accept and go on his way, back to that lonely desert with only a horse. "And Wildfire doesn't love him," she said. And the scarlet fired her neck and cheek and temple. That leap of blood seemed to release a riot of emotions. What had been a torment became a torture. She turned Sarchedon homeward, but scarcely had faced that way when she wheeled him again. She rode slowly and she rode swiftly. The former was hateful because it held her back, from what she no longer dared think. The latter was fearful because it hurried her on swiftly, irresistibly to her fate. Lin Slone had changed his camp and had chosen a pass high up where the great walls had begun to break into sections. Here there was intimacy with the sheer cliffs of red and yellow. Wide avenues between the walls opened on all points of the compass, and that one to the north appeared to be a gateway down into the valley of monuments. The monuments trooped down into the valley to spread out and grow isolated in the distance. Sloane's camp was in a clump of cedars surrounding a spring. There was grass and white sage where rabbits darted in and out. Lucy did not approach this camp from that roundabout trail which she had made upon the first occasion of her visiting Slone. They had found an opening in the wall, and by riding this way into the pass, Lucy cut off miles. In fact, the camp was not over 15 miles from Bostel's Ford. It was so close that Lucy worried, lest some horse-tracker should stumble on the trail and follow her up into the pass. This morning she espied Slone at his outlook on a high rock that had fallen from the great walls. She always looked to see if he was there, and she always saw him. The days she had not come, which were few, he had spent watching for her there. His tasks were not many, and he said that he had nothing to do but wait for her. Lucy had a persistent and remorseful yet sweet memory of Slone at his lonely lookout. Here was a fine, strong, splendid young man who had nothing to do but watch for her, a waste of precious hours. She waved her hand from afar, and he waved in reply. Then as she passed the cedared part of the pass, Slone was no longer visible. She put Sarchedon to a run up the hard, wind-swept sand, and reached the camp before Slone had climbed down from his perch. Lucy dismounted reluctantly. What would he say about the riding habit that she wore? She felt very curious to learn, and shyer than ever before, and altogether different. The skirt made her more of a girl, it seemed. "Hello, Lin," she called. There was nothing in her usual greeting to betray the state of her mind. "Good morning, Lucy," he replied very slowly. He was looking at her, she thought, with different eyes, and he seemed changed, too, though he had long been well, and his tall, lithe rider's form, his lean, strong face, and his dark eyes were admirable in her sight. Only this morning, all because she had worn a girl's riding skirt instead of boys' chaps, everything seemed different. Perhaps her aunt had been right after all, and now things were natural. Slone gazed so long at her that Lucy could not keep silent. She laughed. "How do you like me in this?" "I like you much better," Slone said bluntly. "Auntie made this. She's been trying to get me to ride in it." "It changes you, Lucy. But can you ride as well?" "I'm afraid not. What's Wildfire going to think of me?" "He'll like you better, too. Lucy, how's the king coming on?"
"Lin, I tell you, if I wasn't as crazy about Wildfire as you are, I'd say he'll have to kill himself to beat the king," replied Lucy with gravity.
"Sometimes I doubt, too," said Slone. "But I only have to look at Wildfire to get back my nerve. Lucy, that will be the grandest race ever run."
"Yes,"
sighed Lucy. "What's wrong? Don't you want Wildfire to win?"
"Yes and no, but I'm going to beat the king anyway. Bring on your Wildfire."
Lucy unsaddled Sarchedon and turned him loose to graze while Slone went out after Wildfire. And presently it appeared that Lucy might have some little time to wait. Wildfire had lately been trusted to hobbles, which fact made it likely that he had strayed. Lucy gazed about her at the great looming red walls and out through the avenues at the grey desert beyond. This adventure of hers would soon have to end, for the day of the races was not far distant, and after that it was obvious she would not have occasion to meet Slone. To think of never coming to the pass again gave Lucy a pang. Unconsciously she meant that she would never ride up here again, because Slone would not be here. A wind always blew through the pass, and that was why the sand was so clean and hard. Today it was a pleasant wind, not hot nor laden with dust, and somehow musical in the cedars. The blue smoke from Slone's fire curled away and floated out of sight. It was lonely, with the haunting presence of the broken walls ever manifest, but the loneliness seemed full of content. She no longer wondered at Slone's desert life. That it might be well for a young man during those years when adventure and daring called him, but she doubted that it would be well for all of a man's life, and only a little of it ought to be known by a woman. She saw how the wildness and loneliness and brooding of such a life would prevent a woman's development. Yet she loved it all and wanted to live near it, so that when the need pressed she could ride out into the great open stretches and see the dark monuments grow nearer and nearer till she was under them in the silent and colored shadows. Slone returned presently with Wildfire. The stallion shone like a flame in the sunlight. His fear and hatred of Slone showed in the way he obeyed. Slone had mastered him, and must always keep the upper hand of him. It had from the first been a fight between man and beast, and Lucy believed it would always be so. But Wildfire was a different horse when he saw Lucy. Day by day, evidently Slone loved him more and tried harder to win a little of what Wildfire showed at sight of Lucy. Still, Slone was proud of Lucy's control over the stallion. He was just as much heart and soul bent on winning the great race as Lucy was. She had ridden Wildfire bareback at first, and then they had broken him to the saddle. It was serious business, that training of Wildfire, and Slone had peculiar ideas regarding it. Lucy rode him up and down the pass until he was warm. Then Slone got on Sarchedon. Wildfire always snorted and showed fight at sight of Sage King or Nagger, and the stallion Sarchedon infuriated him because Sarchedon showed fight too. Slone started out ahead of Lucy, and then they raced down the long pass. The course was hard-packed sand. Fast as Sarchedon was, and matchless as a horseman was Slone, the race was over almost as soon as it began. Wildfire ran indeed like fire before the wind. He wanted to run, and the other horse made him fierce. Like a burr, Lucy stuck low over his neck, a part of the horse, and so light he would not have known he was carrying her but for the repeated calls in his ears. Lucy never spurred him. She absolutely refused to use spurs on him. This day she ran away from Slone, and turning at the end of the 2-mile course they had marked out, she loped Wildfire back. Slone turned with her, and they were soon in camp.
Lucy did not jump off. She was in a transport. Every race kindled a mounting fire in her. She was scarlet of face, out of breath, her hair flying, and she lay on Wildfire's neck and hugged him and caressed him and talked to him in low tones of love. Slone dismounted and got Sarchedon out of the way, then crossed to where Lucy still fondled Wildfire. He paused a moment to look at her, but when she saw him he started again and came close up to her as she sat in the saddle. "You went past me like a bullet," he said.
"Oh, can't he run?"
murmured Lucy. "Could he beat the king today?" Slone had asked the question every day more than once.
"Yes, he could. Today. I know it," replied Lucy. "Oh, I get so excited. I make a fool of myself over him. Oh, but to ride him going like that. Lin, it's just glorious."
"You sure can ride him," replied Slone. "I can't see a fault anywhere. In him or in your handling him. He never breaks. He goes hard, but he saves something. He gets mad, fierce all the time, yet he wants to go your way. Lucy, I never saw the like of it. Somehow you and Wildfire make a combination. You can't be beat."
"Do I ride him well?"
she asked softly. "I could never ride him so well."
"Oh, Lin, you just want to please me. Why, Van couldn't ride with you."
"I don't care, Lucy," replied Slone stoutly. "You rode this horse perfect. I found fault with you on the king, on your mustangs, and on this black horse Sarch, but on Wildfire? You grow there."
"Oh, what will Dad say, and Farland, and Holly, and Van? Oh, I'll crow over Van," said Lucy. "I'm crazy to ride Wildfire out before all the Indians and ranchers and riders before the races, just to show him off, to make them stare."
"No, Lucy, the best plan is to surprise 'em all. Enter your horse for the race, but don't show up till all the riders are at the start."
"Yes, that'll be best. And Lin, only 5 days more. 5 days!"
Her words made Slone thoughtful, and Lucy, seeing that straight away, grew thoughtful too. "Sure. Only 5 days more," repeated Slone slowly. His tone convinced Lucy that he meant to speak again as he had spoken once before, precipitating the only quarrel they had ever had. "Does anyone at Bostel's Ford know you meet me out here?" he asked suddenly.
"Only Auntie. I told her the other day. She had been watching me. She thought things. So I told her."
"What did she say?" went on Slone curiously.
"She was mad," replied Lucy. "She scolded me. She said... But anyway, I coaxed her not to tell on me."
"I want to know what she said," spoke up the rider deliberately. Lucy blushed, and it was a consciousness of confusion, as well as Sloane's tone, that made her half angry.
"She said when I was found out there'd be a great fuss at the ford. There would be talk. Auntie said I'm now a grown-up girl. Oh, she carried on. Bostel would likely shoot you, and if he didn't, some of the riders would. Oh, Lin, it was perfectly ridiculous the way Auntie talked."
"I reckon not," replied Slone. "I'm afraid I've done wrong to let you come out here, but I never thought. I'm not used to girls. I'll deserve what I get for letting you come."
"It's my own business," declared Lucy spiritedly, "and I guess they'd better let you alone."
Slone shook his head mournfully. He was getting one of those gloomy spells that Lucy hated. Nevertheless, she felt a stir of her pulses. "Lucy, there won't be any doubt about my stand when I meet Bostel," said Slone. Something had animated him.
"What do you mean?"
Lucy trembled a little. There was a sternness about Slone, a dignity that seemed new. "I'll ask him to let you marry me." Lucy stared aghast. Slone appeared in dead earnest.
"Nonsense!" she exclaimed shortly.
"I reckon the possibility is that replied Slone bitterly. "But my motive isn't."
"It is. Why, you've known me only a few days. Dad would be mad. Like as not, he'd knock you down. I tell you, Sloane Lynn, my dad is pretty rough. And just at this time of the races, and if Wildfire beats the king... Oh."
"When Wildfire beats the king, not if," corrected Slone.
"Dad will be dangerous," warned Lucy. "Please don't ask him that. Then everybody would know that you...
"That's it. I want everybody at your home to know."
"But it's a little place," flashed Lucy. "Everyone knows me. I'm the only girl. There have been other fellows who... And oh, I don't want you to be made fun of."
"Why?" he asked. Lucy turned away her head without answering. Something deep within her was softening her anger. She must fight to keep angry, and that was easy enough, she thought, if she could only keep in mind Sloane's opposition to her. Strangely, she discovered that it had been sweet to find him always governed by her desire or will. "Maybe you misunderstand," he began presently, and his voice was not steady. "I don't forget I'm only a beggarly rider. I couldn't have gone into the fort at all. I was such a ragamuffin."
"Don't talk like that," interrupted Lucy impatiently.
"Listen," he replied. "My asking Bostel for you doesn't mean I've any hope. It's just I want him and everybody to know that I asked."
"But, Dad, everybody will think that you think there's a reason. But, Dad, everybody will think that you think that there's a reason why you ought to ask," burst out Lucy with a scarlet face.
"Sure, that's it," he replied.
"But there's no reason. None. Not a reason under the sun," retorted Lucy hotly. "I found you out here. I did you a little service. We planned to race Wildfire, and I came out to ride him. That's all."
Sloane's dark, steady gaze disconcerted Lucy. "But no one knows me, and we've been alone in secret."
"It's not altogether that. I told Auntie," faltered Lucy.
"Yes, just lately."
"Lin Slone, I'll never forgive you if you ask Dad that," declared Lucy with startling force.
"I reckon that's not so important."
"Oh, so you don't care."
Lucy felt herself indeed in a mood not comprehensible to her. Her blood raced. She wanted to be furious with Slone, but somehow she could not wholly be so. There was something about him that made her feel small and thoughtless and selfish. Slone had hurt her pride. But the thing that she feared and resented and could not understand was the strange gladness Sloane's declaration roused in her. She tried to control her temper so she could think. Two emotions contended within her, one of intense annoyance at the thought of embarrassment surely to follow Sloane's action, and the other a vague, disturbing element, all sweet and furious and inexplicable. She must try to dissuade him from approaching her father.
"Please don't go to Dad."
She put a hand on Sloane's arm as he stood close up to Wildfire. "I reckon I will," he said.
"Lin."
In that word there was the subtle, nameless charm of an intimacy she had never granted him until that moment. He seemed drawn as if by invisible wires. He put a shaking hand on hers and crushed her gauntleted fingers. And Lucy, in the current now of her woman's need to be placated, if not obeyed, pressed her small hand to his. How strange to what lengths a little submission to her feeling had carried her. Every spoken word, every movement seemed to exact more from her. She did not know herself.
"Lin, promise not to speak to Dad."
"No," his voice rang.
"Don't give me away. Don't tell my dad."
"What?" he queried incredulously. Lucy did not understand what, but his amazed voice, his wide-open eyes of bewilderment, seemed to aid her into piercing the maze of her own mind. 100 thoughts whirled together,
and all around them was wrapped the warm, strong feeling of his hand on hers. What did she mean that he would tell her father? There seemed to be a deep, hidden self in her. Up out of these depths came a whisper, like a ray of light, and it said to her that there was more hope for Lin Slone than he had ever had in one of his wildest dreams.
Lin, if you tell Dad, then he'll know, and there won't be any hope for you, cried Lucy honestly.
If Slone caught the significance of her words, he did not believe it. "I'm going to Boston after the race and ask him. That's settled," declared Slone stubbornly. At this, Lucy utterly lost her temper.
"Oh, you fool!" she cried.
Slone drew back suddenly as if struck, and a spot of dark blood leaped to his lean face. "No, it seems to me the right way."
"Right or wrong, there's no sense in it, because, oh, can't you see?"
"I see more than I used to," he replied. "I was a fool over a horse, and now I'm a fool over a girl. I wish you'd never found me that day." Lucy whirled in the saddle and made Wildfire jump. She quieted him and, leaping off, threw the bridle to Slone.
"I won't ride your horse in the race,"
she declared with sudden passion. She felt herself shaking all over. "Lucy Bostle, I wish I was as sure as heaven as I am you'll be up on Wildfire in that race," he said.
"I won't ride your horse."
"My horse? Oh, I see. But you'll ride Wildfire."
"I won't."
Slone suddenly turned white, and his eyes flashed dark fire. "You won't be able to help riding him any more than I could help it."
"A lot you know about me, Lin Slone," returned Lucy with scorn. "I can be as bullheaded as you any day."
Slone evidently controlled his temper, though his face remained white. He even smiled at her. "You are Bostle's daughter," he said.
"Yes."
"You are blood and bone, heart and soul a rider, if any girl ever was. You're a wonder with a horse, as good as any man I ever saw. You love Wildfire, and look how strange. That wild stallion, that killer of horses, why, he follows you. He whistles for you. He runs like lightning for you. He loves you." Slone had attacked Lucy at her one weak point. She felt a force rending her. She dared not look at Wildfire. Yes, all that was true, Slone had said. How desperately hard to think of forfeiting the great race she knew she could win.
"Never. I'll never ride your Wildfire again," she said very low.
"Mine? So that's the trouble. Well, Wildfire won't be mine when you ride the race."
"What do you mean?" demanded Lucy. "You'll sell him to Bostle? You couldn't."
"Sell Wildfire? After what it cost me to catch and break him? Not for all your father's lands and horses and money." Sloane's voice rolled out with deep, ringing scorn, and Lucy, her temper quelled, began to feel the rider's strength, his mastery of the situation, and something vague yet splendid about him that hurt her. Slone strode toward her. Lucy backed against the cedar tree and could go no further. How white he was now! Lucy's heart made a great fearful leap, for she imagined Slone intended to take her in his arms, but he did not. When you ride Wildfire in that race, he'll be yours," said Slone huskily.
"How can that be?" questioned Lucy in astonishment.
"I give him to you."
You give Wildfire? To me?"
gasped Lucy. "Yes, right now." The rider's white face and dark eyes showed the strain of great and passionate sacrifice.
"Lin Slone, I can't understand you."
"You've got to ride Wildfire in that race. You've got to beat the king. So I give Wildfire to you. And now, you can't help but ride him."
Why do you give him to me?"
faltered Lucy. All her pride and temper had vanished, and she seemed lost in blankness.
Because you love Wildfire, and Wildfire loves you. If that isn't reason enough, then because I love him, as no rider ever loved a horse. And I love you as no man ever loved a girl.
Slone had never before spoken words of love to Lucy. She dropped her head. She knew of his infatuation, but he had always been shy except once when he had been bold, and that had caused a quarrel. With a strange pain at her breast, Lucy wondered why Slone had not spoken that way before. It made as great a change in her as if she had been born again. It released something. A bolt shot back in her heart. She knew she was quivering like a leaf with no power to control her muscles. She knew if she looked up then, Slone might see the depths of her soul. Even with her hands shutting out the light, she thought the desert around had changed and become all mellow gold and blue and white, radiant as the moonlight, of dreams, and that the monuments soared above them grandly, and were beautiful and noble, like the revelations of love and joy to her. And suddenly she found herself sitting at the foot of the cedar, weeping, with tear-wet hands over her face.
"There's nothing to cry about," Slone was saying. "But I'm sorry if I hurt you."
Will you please fetch Sarch?" asked Lucy tremulously. While Slone went for the horse and saddled him, Lucy composed herself outwardly, and she had two very strong desires, one to tell Slone something, and the other to run. She decided she would do both together. Slone brought Sarchedon. Lucy put on her gauntlets, and mounting the horse, she took a moment to arrange her skirts before she looked down at Slone. He was now pale rather than white, and instead of fire in his eyes there was sadness. Lucy felt the swelling and pounding of her heart, and a long, delicious, shuddering thrill that ran over her. "Lin, I won't take Wildfire," she said.
"Yes, you will. You can't refuse. Remember, he's grown to look to you. It wouldn't be right by the horse."
"But he's all you have in the world," she protested.
Yet she knew any protestations would be in vain. "No, I have good old faithful Nagger."
"Would you go try to hunt another wild stallion, like Wildfire?" asked Lucy curiously. She was playing with the wonderful, sweet consciousness of her power to render happiness when she chose.
"No more horse hunting for me," declared Slone. "And as for finding one like Wildfire, that'd never be."
"Suppose I won't accept him?"
"How could you refuse? Not for me, but for Wildfire's sake." "But if you could be mean and refuse, why, Wildfire can go back to the desert."
"No!"
exclaimed Lucy. "I reckon so."
Lucy paused a moment. How dry her tongue seemed, and her breathing was labored. An unreal, shimmering gleam shone all around her. Even the red stallion appeared enveloped in a glow, and the looming monuments looked down upon her, paternal, old and wise, and bright with the color of happiness. Wildfire ought to have several more days' training, then a day of rest, and then the race, said Lucy, turning again to look at Slone. A smile was beginning to change the hardness of his face. "Yes, Lucy," he said. "And I'll have to ride him?" "You sure will if he's to ever beat the king." Lucy's eyes flashed blue. She saw the crowd, the curious, friendly Indians, the eager riders, the spirited horses, the face of her father, and at last the race itself. Such a race as had never been run, so swift, so fierce, so wonderful. "Then, Lin," began Lucy with a slowly heaving breast, "if I accept Wildfire, will you keep him for me until— and if I accept him and tell you why, will you promise to say—" "Don't ask me again," interrupted Bostel hastily. "I will speak to Bostel." "Wait, will you promise not to say a word? A single word to me? Till after the race?
A word? To you? What about? He queried wonderingly. Something in his eyes made Lucy think of the dawn.
About the... because... why, I'll accept your horse.
Yes, he replied swiftly. Lucy settled herself in the saddle, and shortening the bridle she got ready to spur Sarchedon into a bolt.
Lin, I'll accept Wildfire because I love you.
Sarchedon leaped forward. Lucy did not see Sloane's face nor hear him speak. Then she was tearing through the sage, out past the whistling Wildfire, with the wind sweet in her face. She did not look back.